and I'm going to start the broadcast now.
The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Okay, good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for joining us here today. This is Andrew Dane with SCH on the line, and I'll be moderating the webinar today. And with me is David Milder with DANTH and Bob Costa also with SCH. We're going to go ahead and wait a few more minutes. We'll wait till a minute or two after noon to go ahead and get started. And then David and Bob, if you guys want to mute your phones until it's you're on, that would be helpful. So I just typed in the chat box. If folks have questions, they can go ahead and type them into the chat box, and we'll probably wait till the end of the webinar to address the questions. Everyone should be on mute that is joining us for the webinar today. Well, so Bob or David, I think I still hear an open mic out there, which is fine if you can stay quiet during the presentation. Otherwise, go ahead and mute.
I can't close my mic off.
My phone is muted.
Okay. All right, David. As long as you're just sitting quietly, I guess that shouldn't be an issue. But there should be. You may have a mute button there, but
I have a mute. I only have a mute for the sound coming in, not the mic going out.
Okay. Well, it sounds fine as long as, just so you know that we can hear you. So we'll give it, let's see, it's noon. We'll just wait another 2 minutes and go ahead and get started. Looks like we've got about 35 people on the webinar so far, and would like to thank everyone for taking the time to join us today for an hour. We're going to talk about planning for downtown revitalization. And we've got a nice mix of people on the call here today. David Milder with DANTH is an economic development specialist who has his own firm, and they specialize in downtown revitalization planning. And we've had the opportunity, Bob and I have had the opportunity to work with David on a few projects. Bob and I work with SCH, short Elliott Hendrickson, which is a engineering, architecture, and planning firm in the Midwest, and so we complement David's expertise in downtown redevelopment. What we bring to the table is the planning background, economic development, transportation, urban design, landscape architecture, and so together we've had the opportunity to work on some projects and wanted to share some of our experiences and findings with you here today. It's 12:01, so and I'm already essentially starting the presentation, so I will just go ahead and start the presentation. The title of the presentation is Revitalizing Small Town Downtowns, and I just did a brief introduction with the three presenters here today. We've divided the presentation up into three parts, and the first part will be David Milder. He'll be talking about the surprising complexity of small town downtowns. looking more at the market analysis and economics of downtowns. Bob Cost is our senior urban designer with SEH, and he'll be talking about a process that he's used successfully in dozens of downtowns called downtown framework planning. And then I'll be talking briefly about some organizing for success, and then wrap things up with some Q&A at the end of the session. As I mentioned just a minute ago, SEH, short Elliott Hendrickson, is an engineering architecture planning firm. We have 26 offices across the country, primarily in the Midwest and Intermountain West. Danth is a small specialty downtown revitalization firm based out of New York, with national expertise on downtowns. So with that, I'm going to mute my phone and turn it over to David, who's going to spend the first 20 minutes talking about small downtown economics.
Thank you, Andrew. One of the things that when I started to deal with small and medium-sized downtowns, that I found out was that small does not mean simple. Many small downtowns are in face very complex situations and problems and challenges, and they need many types of markets and sub-markets analyzed. And two of the towns that Edward and I recently worked in, Sherwood, Wisconsin, and Gering, Nebraska, you can see that the various types of different markets that we had to analyze: retail, housing, office, then one instance daycare. In Gering, again, retail, office, housing, but tourists, and then the tourists had 3 sub-markets that we were looking deeply into. Next, Andrew. And also, what we often find in small downtowns is that they're often impacted by types of urban design that are associated with larger towns. For instance, in Sherwood, there was a town of about 2,800. They already had 4 commercial nodes that were developing. And that was a poor divided conglomeration. And one of the nodes was intercepting residents before they could reach the downtown and kind of just taking traffic away. Another factor was that the road system was bringing residents into the newer part of town and again preventing it to reaching the downtown. The downtown lacked a friendly pedestrian area. There were lots and lots of trucks. It lacked a solid building wall, and strange enough, it lacked parking spaces. And during the daytime, most of the shops were closed. If somebody wanted to go window shopping, there were no stores, a few stores open, and many of them didn't have windows. And then, of course, there was a very popular state park. The access to it was altered on the roadway so that the visitors no longer had to go through Sherwood or this downtown to get to the park. Next, Andrew, please.
No, he's probably already gone.
Hello?
Yep, I'm David, I'm moving it down just a minute. Okay.
Okay. Thank you, sir. Another thing, in a number of small downtowns are also being affected by many trends, and one of the most important is that is that retail forecast for retail is that in the coming years, sales will be growing, but very, very slowly. There will be a positive growth after the recession, but it's not going to reach the level that it did in the buoyant years before the recession. And most importantly, the retail chains are becoming much more discriminate in terms of new locations. They're looking for fewer locations with far less space than they have in their existing stores. And many medium-sized downtowns that have not established themselves with the retail chains that sell kind of department store merchandise, they're going to have a tougher time doing so. And so while in these downtowns there may be market potentials to support, for instance, things like home furnishing stores or an apparel store, the way for those to be realized depend on the locals attracting or growing viable and effective independent small retailers. However, there will be opportunity in a number of these towns to still recruit the kind of local retail, neighborhood retail that is responding to food-related items and convenience types of needs in general. Next, Andrew.
Okay, just got a reminder here, if people have an open mic, try to mute that because we're hearing some background noise.
Okay. And this is just a chart that kind of shows for daring, that one of the things also here is that in the top row, that the market potential index is something that Esri generates. It's useful, and what it basically is showing that the level of purchases for apparel goods listed is lower than the national average, which would be 100. And so, and also underneath what you see is that the stores, and the apparel stores, and the Daring and Daring drive sheds, they are now achieving sales levels that are way below the national levels. So for a national chain looking at this situation, it's not going to kind of register as a kind of a prime place to kind of locate and invest more money. And this is a kind of also a situation that you'll find in a lot of the kind of GAFO department store type merchandise selling stores. Next, please. What we're finding more and more is that successful downtown stores sell primarily to meet needs and separating, like needs versus wants. And one of the big things that the Great Recession did was it really took America's middle class and made them into deliberate consumers. And now those deliberate consumers are being much more focused on needs and instead of wants. And this is also reflected in what is convenient, where proximity gives an advantage to certain stores. So things like food for the home, restaurants, healthcare, personal services, barbers, childcare, etc. Those kinds of things are the kind of functions that small downtown and medium downtowns are liable to succeed in. Another thing that's happening, and we're seeing across the country, is that downtowns are no longer just central business districts, but also central social districts, places where the community comes to play and to have fun and spend quality time with their friends and loved ones. Next, Andrew, please. Next.
Okay. Is this the slide you want here, David? Assessing Sherwood's assets and liabilities?
Yes. I don't know. I think that's next, Andrew. I don't have my own open here. In the projects we do, we think it's really important to do a kind of variant on what's called a SWOT analysis. Many other planners use strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. And we kind of like to assess the location from a perspective of how a business locator, often a retail locator or an office locator, will look at it. And when we did that with Sherwood, what we found is even though it was a small town, it was a fringe community, it had assets like a very strong population growth. It was attracting very well-educated, high-income new residents, and that it had a lot of children, which was an opportunity to build a niche around that as well. There was significant traffic, both of commuters and others passing through, and there was this state park that had a lot of visitors coming in. But on the other hand, it had few retailers, few businesses, and retailers are like sheep. They like to go where there are other retailers, even in a small location. And also, in this community, there were only about 104 people that were working in the community, and research by Bill Ryan in Wisconsin showed that a community of this size should have, on average, about 500 people working within the community. And also, here's a thing that we find often in places, that there's a real need for new or rehabbed commercial spaces. And then the issue is, how do you provide them at an affordable rate for merchants that are going to have relatively modest annual sales revenues? And sales revenues, we use a kind of metric that small merchants downtown merchants can afford about between 8 and 12% of their annual sales towards rent. Next, Andrew. We also, in Gehring, want to look at, we did that, and we're also looking at it from an investor's point of view. And here, in Gehring, they had what's really one of the most important questions is the downtown improving, stagnant, or declining? Somebody's going to invest money in the town. What they want to know that they're getting in before it takes off and they can have an appreciation. But they certainly don't want to invest in a situation where they think that it's going to decline. So at Gehring, there was some very strong recent investments in a new supermarket, 15,000 square foot supermarket, a new family dollar chain, which was a dollar store. That they have a lot of office workers in the area, compared to about 1,500. So they tend to like the family dollar stores. They have a civic center, and they're looking at attracting a hotel, and they have recent population growth. But on the other hand, here they were facing very strong retail competition nearby in Scotts Bluff. They have a limited trade area population, and they had visible vacancies and lots, but most importantly, they had a lack of marketable, suitable spaces that a small merchant could get into, operate, and afford to rent. They had very few CSD functions, social district functions, and their facades and they just lacked a kind of visual charm that really makes people say, hey, it's fun to be here. Next, please. We like to use, one of the things we find in our work is that it's very important to have expectations about what can be achieved that are realistic. And one of the things we like to show our clients is this this table, which is again by work done by Bill Ryan, and it kind of shows the kinds of sales of different kinds of economic functions in downtowns community in the communities of 2,500 to 5,000. One of the things you see here is that food and convenience types of items, the first kind of general heading there, they account for 52% of the sales. But the GAFO stuff, the kind of general merchandise, jewelry stores, hardware stores, appliances, other things, they're there, but they're only accounting for 11.3%. So again, this shows the strength of the food, convenience, and the other operations, which are the remainder of so 63 is 37% of the other, and that's where you get your beauty salons, nail salons, barber shops, and other things like that. And this is, I think, a realistic array of what can be expected. Next, please. Another tool, which is a way of looking at it, is that we use. We'd like to identify in each community how much market share the average operation in various makes, retail and service categories, how much they would have to win if they were to open up in a particular downtown, and how much market share they have to win within the trade area. And this is the results for Sherwood. So again, what you can see here is that the ones that need to win the least percent of the market share are things like, the beauty salons, the nail salons, personal goods and garment repair, gasoline stations, barber shops, and stuff like that. As you get on to about 50%, now those kinds of stores are really going to have to start to probably face more and more competition. So they're going to have to be more powerful and require really, better operators. And the higher you go, the less likely it is going to be for them to be successful without in that environment. Next, please. Trade area definitions are really important. They're often taken as a task to be for granted. It's trade area, after all, is the geographic unit for a retail analysis. If you get the trade area definition wrong, then everything else will follow. And it's easy to buy these kind of rings, or you can buy drive sheds, etc. And what we found is that in certain instances they all work and they're all appropriate. But if you don't, you really have to go in there and look very closely to see what the situation is to determine which one will work for you, because sometimes using just a ring or a drive shed will get you really, really in deep trouble. Next, please. And what we found in Sherwood was that because of if you did the rings or the drive sheds, it would show a very large number of affluent households in the town of Harrison, which is nearby to Sherwood, right next to Sherwood, and which really they had very little chance to capture because the location, the competition was on the going in the other direction, and that other direction going towards Appleton was also where the commuting patterns were. That's where the shopping patterns were, and Sherwood just had no pull to pull in the other way. So while the trade area definition by either a drive shed or a ring would include the Harrison residents, we found that that was not going to work. And so we did this kind of convenience trade area that was more focused to the south and to the east. And that, I think that proved to be right on the mark. Next, please. Now, one of the assessing the competition, when you get down to, we were doing in this study, in the Sherwood study, an analysis of the feasibility study for a supermarket, and it was really important for us to identify where the competition was. And again here, business data is one of the most difficult things to deal with, because while it may sound easy to get an inventory or a census of businesses, it is not. It is very, very difficult. And firms like Esri and Nielsen Claritas that sell these kinds of things are usually using data from Info USA or Dun & Bradstreet or whatever. And there's a lag, etc. So, you know, these lists that you get in that way, they have to be updated and on the field or on computer searches or in some other way to be verified. Otherwise, you're liable to have some costly errors at doing that. Next, please. Well, we identified, and this is one of the things we like to do on projects, is we'd like to identify what the growth potentials are, and within the retailing, and the first tier one are these are the most likely to be accepted. This is a result of our own kind of leakage analysis, and then we go down to a spec tier two, and these are kind of what we call special scenarios, because these are under certain cases where, like a pharmacy up in parts of Wisconsin, you know, a traditional 12,000 square foot pharmacy may not be able to make it, but a 4,000 square foot store that combines a gift shop component or a car shop component, that might be able to work. And there are examples of that we found throughout the state. Another one is a dry cleaning operation. It may not be able to, you know, would need ordinarily to capture about 98 or 100% of the Sherwood's market, which was unlikely, but there was no other dry cleaner going to the south and to the east, and if they took on going to collect and deliver dry cleaning goods, that would be possible for them to develop a larger trade area and therefore become viable. And finally, we look at niches, and where, you know, the thing about niches are that these are often involve specialized stores or groups of stores that have surpluses, and these are stores that are reaching out beyond the trade area that we're looking at and penetrating into a larger trade area, and this offers an opportunity for growth and for other stores that fall in with this niche to benefit from the traffic that the basic founding niche members are drawing in. Next, please. One of the things that we've been finding is that, you know, housing can offer very, very important opportunities and development opportunities, and to help strengthen your downtowns. Even as, you know, Sherwood was an unusual situation. and we were able to find the potential for substantial growth, and we were recommending that that go close to the walkable distance of the downtown. Next, please. But even in Gering, which is Scottsbluff County, in a county that for many years had no population growth and for, you know, in the 90s suffered from great outmigration. What we're seeing is that a combination of outmigration stopping and slight now projected population growth by Esri, and also the kind of backup that occurred in demand that occurred during the Great Recession. There seems to be an opportunity for some housing development that could go in Gering's downtown. Also, you know, what's factored here is that there is a low underwater mortgage rate. It's been a few properties that have been taken over. This looks like it may be a real opportunity, and having 30 or 50 units in and around the downtown can make a big difference, make a significant difference. Next, please. And this is a kind of a final matrix that we do, which combines the totals for housing, offices, personal services, retail, and it says how, you know, gives a range of high and low of estimated amount of new space that should generate or fill, the locations where it should go, when it should go, the kind of co-tenants.
David, got a comment here in the chat box reminding us to mention the backdoor selling. So on the retail side, you know, allowing businesses to tap into e-sales to augment local sales, and just to underscore the importance of that.
Well, I'm glad that I was reminded of that. This is, well, backdoor retailers are retailers who do not sell to, who sell to customers who do not walk in through their front door, okay? So, for instance, there's a bakery in Gering that sells to supermarkets and restaurants throughout the region. There is in Rutland, Vermont, there was a tobacco store. This was back in the 90s, so, you know, 1990s. And it was also a distributor of those products throughout the greater Rutland region, a several county region. And when you can find a store like that, or stimulate stores to do that, they are great tenants to have. They can really anchor parts of the downtown, this is something that when you recruit, you should really kind of look at if you can, look for if you can. It's what should be asked the prospect. You know, one of the things you should, in your analysis of the prospective tenant, you know, kind of look at and see, are they doing this? Do they have this capability, etc. Okay, next, please. One of the things that we did was we happened to look at a small town in a very rural area, part of Wisconsin, and we found here that it also had a kind of very diverse economy, had many components in it. Some of them really surprised me. It had a special school. It had a seniors home, it had a high-tech manufacturer, but it also had a real downtown ambience, retail, and a very important thing, it had its own school system, and a special school that had regional draw. But like as many small towns, rural small towns, the region was sparsely populated, and you know, the economy was either contracting or stalled for a long time. The ability to attracting, you know, some big firms that were going to provide new jobs, proven to be difficult. It wasn't really happening. But on the other hand, the town had several lakes and a real downtown. Next, please. So I think we kind of started looking at this and saying, what if we stop? Why don't we start to try to think out of the box, really? Okay, and say, if it's so difficult for firms to bring for local people to bring in firms that can provide their jobs that will stimulate growth and lower unemployment and attract the residents, why don't we look at other things? What about those that can come without, who will not need jobs, who can bring their own jobs or create their own jobs? And what fits this are people like second homeowners, former residents who are retiring. Superior, Nebraska was a place that had a cache of very lovely Victorian homes, and they went to the high school alumni registry and they courted old alumni and brought them back into those homes. Other retirees who lived in small rural communities who, when they were young, they may want to return. The people who were self-employed. There was one study in Wisconsin that showed that in 2010, the self-employed in rural Wisconsin had grown by 18.7%. It was much far larger than in the urban areas. And then what we call lone eagles. These are people who, like up in Rutland, Vermont, found graphic designers and hedge fund managers who were up in the Killington ski area, and to do all their work, they lived up there year-round, and they were using the internet and telephone to do their transactions and everything. And finally, there's another trend, which is rebooting, which is that a lot of boomers and are finding in their late years, either because they want to and they have the financial resources to do it, or because they've lost their jobs, or whatever, that they're rebooting in the sense of trying to find and establish new careers. And a lot of people, even after they retire at a later age of 65, are doing this because we're living longer and we're in better health than we were before. So is this something we can leverage? Next, please. Well, when I was starting out in this business, my mentor told me the first law of the prime directive for us Star Trek fans of economic development is to leverage existing assets. So if we look at gearing, we take a look at these assets, the median age, the age of about half of the householders, the fact that out-migration has stopped, the fact that also Scottsbluff County has 7 retirement communities, and there's a hospital with 110 attending physicians, and a lot of ranchers and farmers in the larger Panhandle region and further have been kind of coming into preparing to retire. And a study of the leisure travelers found that they're older and well-educated. Their average age is 55, and they're about 59% of them are college grads, and they are fairly affluent with an average income of about $80,000 a year. And so, and the researchers who did this also found that these visitors, they not only like the history of the trails, the Oregon Trail and the Mormon Trail go through Gehring, but they like the authentic Western small town charm. These people like small towns and want to be in them. So, can Gehring build off of these things? I think these are the kinds of questions, the kinds of assets, the kind of thinking that we have to do more when we think about economic development in small towns. That trying to get the big corporation or the small corporation to open up an industrial firm or a major office complex. That's not where it is. I think we have to start thinking more along these kinds of patterns. And when this happens, the downtown will benefit from the economic growth and the influx of folks. Seniors will need a place to congregate. Seniors tend to, like art in downtowns, even in more rural and less urban areas. We found in the study in Sherwood is that downtowns are attracting both the young and the empty nesters and the more seniors. So can this happen on a larger scale? I don't know, but I think it's certainly the kinds of areas that we ought to look at the possibilities and not just write them off. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you, David. And Bob, if you want to go ahead and unmute your phone.
Oh, sure. So what I want to go over a little bit here is how to connect the dots from what David is talking about, which is really, setting the table for the more physical planning piece of a downtown. So once we get a basis of growth and vision, how do we translate that information, that data, into a plan? So given the limited resources financially that a lot of small towns face, rather than take on a much grander downtown planning process that costs tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of dollars, we've found this notion of creating a downtown framework plan, and often that will lead to development of a set of design guidelines and branding and wayfinding exercises, can be done fairly economically and sort of, as I say, help connect the dots from what David's doing. So next slide. So downtown framework planning, essentially, we build off the city's comprehensive plan, so we're not reinventing the wheel, but we do need to do some confirmation of goals and objectives, study or look at, evaluate land use policies. There is a degree or level of public involvement, so we're typically working with a committee that might be comprised of planning commission members, maybe some folks from the city council, and certainly downtown business and downtown building representatives. We'll work with folks through a first sort of visioning meeting to establish a common vision for the downtown, unless that's already been set by the comp plan. And things like pedestrian friendly, convenient access to parking, the mix of shops and restaurants, a design theme, if it's a particular kind of niche riverfront town, or in the case of Gehring, where we're working with David, there's the Oregon Trail and this physical feature called the Nebraska National Monument that creates a bit of a theme opportunity. Next. So the downtown framework plan and the planning process will identify and illustrate opportunities for public and private investment. And again, that's where connecting the dots. So it's not just about the facade renovations or streetscape. It really starts with the economic development parameters, and depending on the community, focusing on new businesses, potentially new buildings. Do building facades need to be renovated in order to make them more attractive? And then, is there need for public realm improvements, i.e. streetscape? The planning process also then identifies, priority projects, what Andrew's going to talk about, which is the organizational structures, and, are there additional studies that have to be done? Next. Outcomes. So, Part of the reason why we're doing this is that you need to gain consensus and political support because we're going to be using public and private money. We want to make sure we've got a set of redevelopment strategies that will lead to tangible results, leveraging concurrent and future studies and projects, improve the economic vitality and quality of life, and preserve and reinforce sense of place. So these actually can become benchmarks that you can test and evaluate your planning process against, right? Next. So, quick case study. We're working for the city of Gaylord, Minnesota, which is a town of a couple thousand, and a more, I guess we'll call it sort of semi-rural. We're outside of the metro area of the Twin Cities, probably by about 30 minutes, and we're about an hour and 10 from the edge of the metro area. So here you see the downtown. The area we're focusing on and identified in yellow. The core is this main avenue, Minnesota 5, you know, very similar to what you find in a lot of communities. It's a state route, and so we've got influences from the Minnesota DOT and others. But and then the areas surrounding this are sort of the edges of the downtown. Next. So part of, again, looking at this physical inventory, as someone like David is looking at building square footages, what are the uses, who are the owners, we'll do an assessment of the condition of these structures. We were just in Nebraska during last week and walking through a number of older buildings like this with one of our architects, trying to understand, you know, what will it take to take if you look at the lower picture and the right, you know, that's a classic Main Street building. There's a building to the left of it that looks like it's had some sort of, you know, suburbanized frontage on it, and then the building to the left, again, almost looks like a, you know, strip mall. So, you know, these are buildings that have potential, but how do we get them improved to add to the character of the downtown and make sure we've got successful basis for business? Next slide. So in this case, we developed this sort of map, which rather than looking at a traditional land use set of categories, we were more interested in the actual activities going on in these buildings. So, you know, where is gathering taking place? So these are typically public buildings. Where is shopping occurring? Where's working, meaning these are, you know, services or administrative offices. Where are people going to eat? Where is their parking? Where are there opportunity sites? And these, what we mean by opportunity is that this map was actually developed through a workshop with downtown committee of business owners, the Economic Development Association. And so these little dots you see on the map were basically the outcome of spending several hours talking about that process, identifying issues, identifying opportunities. So now we can start to direct investment as it relates to, again, connecting dots from David's work. Next. The other thing that's always a critical hot button issue in any downtown is parking supply. So basically getting a handle on, you know, what are the numbers. There's always anecdotal evidence that we don't have enough parking or that there's parking problems. Often what we find is that the quantity of parking is not really the issue. It's generally the management of that resource. But as you see with the brown line through the middle here, this dashed line, which is the state route, we've got a number of surface parking facilities right on Main Street. While that provides opportunity for parking, does not create a very good street frontage, and we're basically missing economic development opportunity through, you know, taxable and profitable businesses. You can also see in green the number of on-street parking and it's fairly significant. So in this case, for this community, the quantity of parking supplies weren't an issue, but we spent quite a bit of time talking to people about how to manage that resource. Next. So this work then, as I talk about creating a framework plan, is if I contrast this with plans that we might do for communities of 50 to 150,000, where it's a 12 to 18 month process, and we're creating a very extensive report and sort of set of action plans. In the case of smaller communities, 8 to 1,000 or below, we can actually we try to bring these things together in several pages. So we'll identify what the goals were that we created with the committee. In the case of Gaylord, there's a vision, and there was also a set of guidelines for guiding downtown development, anything from addressing vacant buildings to using appropriate materials, preserving historically significant buildings. Next. And then we produced this graphic plan. In this case, issues and opportunities are summarized with a series of colors and sort of action, good, strong visuals that and notes. So this can really become kind of a guide plan without having, again, a long, exhaustive report that gives the downtown merchants and civic leaders a sense of what to do next Tuesday. Enhance the entry to downtown, provide wayfinding, strengthen visual connections, consider crossings to school. So you guys can read this, but this is, again, sort of that quick scan, and then what we've identified in these sort of blue colors is where to add new buildings. Next. This project in Gaylord was actually beneficial in that there was a state route design work being done to upgrade the state highway, and working in conjunction with our engineering group, which is the acting city engineer in this town, and our downtown committee, we created a set of visuals, and then that went into actually a set of construction documents. So the first implementation project for the downtown is actually going to be coming online next summer, which is convenient, and really we're hoping will boost the economic activity that folks like David are identifying. But these sorts of visuals, representations of the design idea, the concept, really can help people get behind the fundraising efforts and the investment efforts, get people excited, and again, build support. Next. So an outcome of these kinds of studies, or in some cases, this will actually, creating design guidelines will be the actual activity. Why do design guidelines? So they add investment, complement public investment, raise the bar. If you think about some of those images we just saw of downtown Gaylord, how you might sensitively pull off the 1960s, 1970s lap siding and fake stone and turn it into what you see in this upper right picture, how you would basically restore that building, as opposed to what you see in the lower right, which is a new building, but with no guidance, you end up with a blank wall. Again, as we point out on the left of the slide, this usually needs to work with the zoning code. Sometimes it's a supplement. And the other benefit is it assists the development review process, both from architects, developers, everybody who's involved in that delivery system. Next. So another example, this is actually taken from a book that was nicely written called Main Street. about work in Milwaukee. So what you see here is on the left, the original building, the classic owner living above his shop. And, you know, fast forward 60, 70 years later, and this thing's been turned into some other use. We're not quite sure. I guess it might be religious, which is fine. These buildings can often be adaptable. But I think you'd all agree that what's been done to this building is not helping its value or contributing to its sex of its neighbors. Next. So who would want to participate in these kinds of projects for creating design guidelines? We certainly need staff and building officials. We need the downtown building owners, both public and private. Business owners, whether you own your building or not, you know, both profit, nonprofit. It's always helpful if we can find local developers, local architects, corporations and franchisors if they're there. Design companies and our contractors are also critical to get on board, both because there's an investment opportunity for here, but if you don't get them to the table early, they can end up torpedoing your best efforts because they feel that they're being threatened by you know, sign standards or a change in the sign ordinance. So the next slide. So here's some suggestions for renovation, restoration, replacement, or construction of new facilities, existing facilities. You really need to look at the context and character, the massing and scale. So the sketch on the right is the kind of thing we'll often pull together, just quick architectural sketches trying to make people understand that Main Street buildings, traditional architecture has a top, a middle, and a base. We look at build-to lines and setbacks, building width and facade articulation, the kinds of materials. So here would be, you know, that issue of saying, you know, reflective glass would be prohibited, aluminum siding, lap siding. You know, we would typically either say these are prohibited if we're doing standards or not recommended if they're guidelines, and we would look at residential type building materials and systems and identify that those are not appropriate. Fenestration, such as doors and windows, awnings, canopies, signs. Often we will make commentary on franchise or corporate architecture, because what we often find is that those kinds of uses, a hamburger shop, a sandwich shop, and you know who we're talking about, they can easily be fit or handled in existing ground floor of Main Street buildings. So rather than tear one down and put up a parking lot with a McBurger, you know, let's see if we can recruit them to come in and renovate a great old building. Parking lot design is also part of that system. Next. Branding and theming, wayfinding are another issue that tends to plague small towns and can actually give you an edge. But I think, you know, David would agree, so would Andrew, that this would not, you know, this would not be the first thing we'd recommend. If you've done a framework plan or you've got a good sense of your economic development moves, right, and your recommendations for implementation, one of the implementation steps would be to think about what is the brand of your downtown, or is it appropriate to have a theme. So the examples you see on the bottom, State Street in Madison, Wisconsin, is a way for them to really, you know, pump up the identity for that pedestrian mall. City of Dubuque on the Mississippi, you know, it's a very traditional French architectural downtown, and they're all about showing their spirit. And the image on the left is actually from New Ulm, Minnesota, which brands itself as a sort of traditional Main Street built on their Germanic heritage. So history, culture, something stylized and simple, and then it's always important that you develop through that process a set of rules and guidelines. Next. Developing that system usually involves maybe a logo or some district icons if the downtown is big enough to handle it, or the community, wants to identify that. Gateway features. These can simply be a fancy light fixture or a sign, but it can be as more involved as a piece of public art or even a great piece of architecture. And then, the sort of bottom-hanging fruit I think a lot of communities quickly gravitate through is a banner program. And there are those phantom banner manufacturers out there that, welcome to Community X. Those are fairly inexpensive to do, but I think a lot of communities find that they wear out and they aren't necessarily a great investment. But if done properly or done uniquely, they can certainly be part of, again, being part of a system. Field testing, measuring, refining, rather than roll out an expensive system for the whole downtown. What the city of Portage did in Indiana was put in one district of signing, let that they tested that out for a year or two, got good feedback, it seemed to work, they expanded it to the rest of their community. And then obviously you need to implement it and you need to maintain it. Next. So this is an example of a project that we did long ago in the city of West Des Moines, and they had a business district called Valley Junction. It was the founding of the city where the rail line came through, and very traditional kind of turn of the century. And so that's why you see the graphics here, pulling off the train icon. And then, as I mentioned, having a whole system of where's parking, how long can I park, welcome to visitors, but generally this notion of getting people to downtown, once I'm downtown, recognizing I'm there, and where is the public parking and how long can I park there. I mean, just answering or addressing those 4 or 5 things can really go a long way to strengthening the success of your business and your merchants. I think that's it, David and Andrew.
Okay, thank you, Bob. We got 1 minute left to go here. Fortunately, I thought we might be a little tight. I didn't prepare too much. I'm going to whip through a couple slides. We wanted to sort of finish this with a discussion on organizing, for success. And this is just a picture from the Chippewa Falls Main Street office in Wisconsin that I had the chance to pop in a couple weeks ago. And really the photo just sort of illustrating, their organizations, successful downtowns, require organizations and staffing and dedication and focus. It's a complex undertaking, and there's, not just events, recruitment, branding, joint marketing, sort of a whole slew of efforts that need to be undertaken. And this is a slide that I really like that just talks about, sort of the building blocks for any successful community development effort. And what I found in working with Bob and David over the last few years is that we've gone into some communities where there hasn't really been a strong organizational component here in the middle, but where we have a lot of interest in doing something. And in the process of putting together the plan and gathering the knowledge and information, tapping into the resources that are there, and getting that information from the community and other sources, and then packaging that up into strategies and plans, that this process of doing this has been pretty powerful in terms of helping sort of lay the seeds and the groundwork for strengthened organization and getting people involved in understanding sort of what the key challenges are facing the downtown and what some of those key strategies are to address those challenges can be really powerful. So there's a lot of different organizational structures to consider out there. The paper, David and I wrote a paper that includes a short discussion on some different types of organizational structures for downtowns. in one recent study I read, they talked about the Main Street program being more applicable for communities of 5,000 and over, and also said that they've got about 4 out of 5 communities that have a Main Street program are successful with that type of organization. Certainly other types of options to consider in terms of organizing, whether it's a rider program where you've got some staffing that's maybe shared with some other communities in the area, part-time consultants, you can set these things up underneath chambers, tourism councils, etc. But the important part is you need an organization in place to implement these plans. And so in conclusion, the approach that we really sort of advocating today, this right fit approach, really balances the economic and design considerations that are critical for downtown. So looking not just at the market potentials and, how do we capture those market potentials, but also, what are the design investments and the public improvement investments that need to go in order to attract and retain and grow the types of businesses that are seen as most viable for the community. So establishing this linkage between the economic development and the analysis and the public infrastructure, public improvements, and private design improvements is critical for communities. And in the process of putting these plans together, as I mentioned before, developing a common understanding of what the critical issues are that helps align different stakeholders, build support for putting the plan together and implementing it. And then in conclusion, here we've got some resources available at David Milder's website, danth.com. And then also we wanted to put an offer out there for communities, smaller communities that are looking at potential downtown projects. Myself, Bob, David would be available to follow up with you. I would be your primary point of contact. If you have questions about scoping out a project in the future, or want to bounce a question or an idea off of us, or even brainstorm different funding options that might be available to help pay for a plan. Next slide's got their contact information here. There were a few folks that asked if the presentations were going to be made available. And I could certainly email those out to folks. If you wanted to shoot me an email, I'll take this PowerPoint and compress it down so it's not, I think it's kind of big right now, but I'll compress it down as a PDF and I can send it out to folks. So you see my email address up at the top there. If folks have any more questions right now before it's 1 o'clock, it's 1:05. We're kind of past our time here. But if you have any questions, feel free to follow up with any of us directly via phone or email. Appreciate the questions and the comments here I've been responding to, and I apologize again for the audio. We had some audio glitches here. So with that, I don't see any more last-minute questions. On behalf of everybody who joined us here today, really appreciate your time, and look forward to hopefully hearing from you. If you have RFPs coming out or projects, please keep us in mind, and have a great rest of your week.
I'm muted, so it's going fine.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye, David.
Thank you.
Yep.